Okay, let's get started. I don't think we'll get more people, but yeah, so welcome to breakout room number 8. Here are the agendas. Talk about EIP, implementation, free DA with block auction. I suppose we chatted about that 2 weeks ago, which I wasn't there, but we can briefly touch base on that. And Julian has two documents to share and discuss, and I also have one about block proposal for ePBS. So in terms of EIP, I don't think there's much to touch base there. The EIP is out. Anyone's welcome to review. The consensus spec is out. It's worth mentioning that Eton has been leaving some reviews on the EIP itself. And Eton is also adding live client testing and live client documentation to the EIP. So if you see the Discord channel, Eton has an update on that. So that is if you're interested in more live client type of stuff. But yeah, so that's the EIP. In terms of the implementation status, I can speak for Prism team. So we're working on implementation. I'm currently working on the RPC endpoints. That is for the proposer to submit blocks, to sign the header, and to sign the execution payload. POTUS is working on more like a core state transition function and for choice. That is, yeah, so that's on the Prism team side. I think like we could have I can speak on the Prism team that we think we could have a local DevNet by DevCon, and by then, if any clients want to join us, we can do a multi-client DevNet. But yeah, besides Prism, I wonder if other consensus layer team wants to share their update.
Yeah, sure. Teco is progressing. I say what I've been working on now, and then leave some updates from Stefan, which is working on those things. So me is currently what I did is updating the valid. I'm working on a validator client side currently. I'm done with the rescheduling of these events that changes because it's a lot anatomy changes. So we've done that, and I'm working on implementing the new duties for the PTC. So far so good. And yeah, I leave Stefan updates from his side.
Yeah, okay. So from my side, the last week I worked on the beacon chain state transition changes. That is done. And now I'm working on the P2P, specifically the gossip topics, all of the validations, the 3 new pools, and the RPC endpoints as well. And what's left, I guess, after that is fork choice, which is the most complicated part, I guess. And yeah, of course, the validator side and proposing, and yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, if you have any feedback on the P2P gossip rules, because I think that for us it's slightly weak in a way that we didn't really think it thoroughly before putting out there. There are definitely things that could be reordered such that it's better. Feel free to like raise that. Yeah, I'm definitely curious for feedback for the P2P rules.
Yeah, I have a couple of notes which I will share on Discord. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I can go for Lord Star, and yeah, so I've been working on state transition and block processing architecture as such. But yeah, we'll share maybe a better update in the next breakout call.
Thank you. Any other clients want to share an update?
Sure. So Nimbus has been just going through the EPF program, and there's been progress on that. We're still kind of at the stage of, I'll be honest, a kind of data types and beacon chain helpers, but progress.
Nice. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I guess that's all the client teams we have. And the next items is I suppose put free DA with block auction. So like for those that are not like following closely, I guess the recap, which this was also brought up 2 weeks ago, is that with block auction, this doesn't happen in slot auction. This only happens in block auction. So in block auction, there's this, I guess I can call it a phenomenon in a way that um proposer or a builder could commit a block hash at the consensus phase, but at the execution phase, the execution block that is revealed could be invalid, right? And that invalid block could, for example, contain full blobs, could contain 2 MB of code data. It could be like, for example, a very expensive block by the code data usage, but that block is invalid. But that block is also voted on time by the PTC committee member, right? And then, so what can an attacker do with this block? You might ask, right? The attacker could, for example, build like a rollup, like cheating rollup that uses data availability as such. But to some people, this is not true DA, right? Because honest node will not serve this block. It's only you have to modify the client to save invalid block, and then you have to serve the block basically as a dishonest client. So in a way, we like some people like agree that we cannot argue this as free DA because this doesn't really provide liveness to the rollup that try to cheat. So now the open question is that is this enough threat to kill a block auction, for example? I mean, there are many reasons why slot auction is better than block auction, which like we have been considering doing slot auction for a while. If you look at this Notion doc by Reed team put out, right, there is essentially let's see, this where is it? Yeah, there is this page that compares slot auction versus like block auction, and then slot auction is just like kind of better in all avenue. And then, so I do think that we will like move to slot auction at some point, but then the question is when. It is pretty trivial to change to slot auction instead of committing to a block hash, you just commit to the builder. So when we want to change it, I don't suspect is that it is that much work for both client side and then the spec side. But the question is that when do we pull the trigger? And yeah, does anyone have any like inputs want to add on to this?
So the real free DA will be only just 32 bytes of the block hash, correct?
Yes, and then you rely a node that serve you invalid data such that you can prove against it.
Assuming that this is not the case, the only true free DA is 32 bytes per block.
Right, which is nothing. A little useless, people will say.
Exactly. Generally, I would say that if slot auction is anyway better and spec change is not that big, why not doing soon instead of that's my so what are the counter argument for not doing that? Is there any more complex outside the protocol, more complexity outside there? Or yeah, probably I have to go through.
No worries. Yeah, so definitely curious to hear feedback from Julia and Thomas. But like the biggest counter argument that I have understood so far is that it makes local block building at a disadvantage, and Polis didn't really like that at all. So for example, today when you request a slot or a block at second 0, you get this local value, right? And then you compare this local value with the builder's value, and then you can essentially add some boost to it. You have a censorship or Oracle flag, but then if today there is a 6-second lag between your local value and the actual value, that for example, get mempool, it may be harder to evaluate at that from your local's perspective. So that's probably the only counter argument that I have heard.
Yeah, and
Besides for choice, which like Julia can touch base on that later. Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm connecting back to the discussion that previous breakout session has been widely discussing that. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with Enrico that if, for example, the complexity does not increase multifold, then it makes sense to have more flexibility and go with slot auctions. And even if, for example, it might put local block building at a disadvantage, but it could happen that even local engines might sort of get this feature and of predicting what value they can pack by the time it's time to emit the payload. So in that way, I mean, I don't actually see that it hinders any capability even for local engines. It's just matter of people building that module, and if we have this open source community, so maybe this problem isn't hard enough. And for example, if there is open source builder code that is available out there, then it could also be easy to import it as a module inside local engine. So in that way, I don't see that in long term local engines could be at any disadvantage. But if, for example, we have plurality of builders out there and you get very competitive bids, it basically makes sense to go with some feature that can improve the flexibility and that can improve the economic value of the block.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Any more feedback on this topic?
Maybe I could add on to the arguments against. I think so. Why local block the disadvantage is it's difficult to compare the value of your block to the value of a block 6 seconds from now. But potentially, this problem also exists in block auctions because we're just changing the structure of the auction and when time of delivery happens. And secondly, this only is relevant for proposers that have a preference for their local value that has some relative value compared to the public value. So local block value Roost and Prism would maybe suffer from this, but it's been shown that these values up until now don't contribute super much to the sensor resistance of the network, whereas parameters like min bid and net boost, they don't suffer from this problem. And they currently have a bigger adoption, but this could change, of course, in this platform.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Okay, so in my meeting notes later, I will put like slot auction is basically preferred at this point and supported by 2 client teams, and let's see how we go from there. But I suspect we'll move to slot auction fairly quickly now. And let's see. Okay, so the next topic, Julian, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thanks. So I'd like to discuss 2 posts that I recently made. One is about the equivocation in slot auctions. So I'll go through that one first and then talk about the second one. So in slot auctions, since the beacon proposer doesn't commit to a specific execution payload, the builder could release one execution payload and release another one later, and thereby confusing the payload timeliness committee or other the next proposer. And this could be bad. So in this post, I present 2 proposals for choice that ensure that builders have the same builder reveal safety and proposers have the same unconditional payment guarantees in slot auctions as compared to the current in block auction ePBS. And also I put the desideratum that if a builder equivocates, then no payload should become canonical. And then these 2 proposals satisfy this, and one of them was get rid of the 3DA problem with block auctions. I was chatting with POTUS about this, and he is questioning whether the second digital atom is truly necessary, because potentially there's just not that much to gain as a builder from equivocating, even with the current choice specifications. So next steps for this are to explore whether this is truly a necessary digital atom, and see if there's FFG safety concern. Yeah, so that's it for the note and equivocation swap option in ePBS. And then the second post is about the P2P market and ePBS. So basically, I was wondering what's the value of this to the protocol. Terence and POTUS have done great work on this, and they've highlighted a few potential advantages. So it would allow for anyone to set a floor price for the auction. It can be used for MEV burn in future protocol upgrades if necessary, and it lowers the entry barriers for very long tail builders who may only bid very infrequently, so don't want to keep out a safe RPC node. Explore what the value of this is to the protocol, and see if there are any other advantages and disadvantages. I would say that the TLDR is the P2P market is definitely a very nice to have, and it could be very valuable for some proposers to express their preferences. For example, allowing them to set a dynamic reserve price throughout the auction, which was Terence's idea. And also, it seems like it's fairly implementable, so it doesn't serve too many downsides. Yeah, so that's it. If there are any questions, I'd love to hear it, and otherwise, you can always reach out to me as well.
Thank you, Julian. Any questions for Julian? Nice. Okay, no question. That's good. Okay, so the next one on the agenda is that blah blah blah. I've been working on this documentation, basically trying to figure out how the end-to-end block proposal works under ePBS. Because currently, block proposal is very simple. You have a validator as a signer, and then you have a beacon node that provides the block. So the validator get the block from the beacon node, signs it, and then send it back to the beacon node. It is a very simple process, right? But then in the ePBS, that it is a commit and review approach, meaning that as a block proposer for a local block, you will have also to sign the header itself, right? And then, so there is this extra round trip of signing, basically. So the question is that how do we like optimize it in a way that like in the happy path, say that if you're using the builder, it doesn't delay the block proposal timeline, right? So like definitely open to feedback on this. I mean, I'm still working on this documentation, but here are just like a few ideas, right? You can think of like the first idea is that as a proposer, you can just call the prepare block endpoint first. And then when the prepare block endpoint is called, that the beacon node is preparing everything in parallel, that is the consensus data that is getting all the execution, compare that, and then essentially just basically have the block prepare. Then this prepare block endpoint will essentially return like a local true like Boolean. And then if the local true Boolean is returned, then as a proposer, you know to whether code get header or get block. If it's get block, that's just the builder case. You get a block, you sign the block, and you're done. But then if it's a local block, Boolean is true, then as a proposer, you will code the get header first, then you will sign the get header, return the get header, and then code the get block, and then again, right? And the reason that is that you need to code the get header first, because the header of the block is basically related to the state root, right? And then because of that, there is this dependency that like we cannot do we don't know the state root of the block unless the header is signed. And then we also cannot have, I guess, like for me, I don't want the proposer to do it themselves, but the proposer shouldn't do the hash true root thing. So this is kind of the first the first idea. The second idea that I had is that just have the proposer code the get block as today, but the get block will either return a full block or a header. If it's a header, or if it's a full block, then it's the same business as usual today, right? But if it's a header, then the proposer will sign the header, submit the header, and then once it submits a header, then the beacon node will return the block, and then the proposer will sign the block and submit the block, right? And then, I mean, I guess like my takeaway is that like because of we want to give these options of like a local block building, there is no nice way of doing things. Like basically the API gets pretty ugly, and I'm also not like an API expert, so I'm probably like doing things way more complicated than issue here. But it's worth noting that since that we are moving to slot auction with high confidence, that this issue does not exist in, for example, in the slot auction because of like proposer just need to sign once, and which is nice. But yeah, I wonder if anyone have any like feedback on this, or if anyone run into that similar issues when they design validator client signing today. Okay, I take no feedback as yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah. So I think a general maybe use something I would look at here as a sorry, for throat clearing over. The idea that the idea too seems to have to bake into more layers of the stack. Let's say policy questions like user preferences, and also some people are running obviously staking pools, which require some set of choices. Presumably, we'll continue to do so. Any of these policies or preferences end up needing to be baked into more of the protocol in an IDEA 2 style way. IDEA 1 has, I mean, this is just looking at your specific two kind of maybe somewhat straw man proposals, but at least comparing those. IDEA 1, the proposer has sort of more directly controls a lot of this policy
Right.
and implements it. And to me, that's an advantage because it reduces
see.
coordination costs across the layers, which have proven problematic or high.
I see. That makes sense. Yeah. So sometimes we want give proposer more control, but giving me proposer more control, we need to have the endpoint for that, and then the endpoint is basically just get header, and then yeah.
Yes, sure. But I think that sort of pays off. Sort of. I think having in certain ways it's a simpler endpoint too. So that's sort of the it's a semantically simpler endpoint, simpler to test, decomposes more readily. My tendency is to and as well as my tendency is to look at that as probably a more overall straightforward system between those two particular options. Even to the extent of the should local header be used, I mean that's an example of the kind of policy question that in theory the proposer itself could choose.
Right.
But the fact that it goes through that cycle of the proposer can, in theory, there's another variant of idea 1, which is idea 1, but the proposer just ignores the local header flag and does whatever it wants. Again, better or worse, the point is that flexibility is there. And as sort of indicated in chat, I think that one of the maybe a concrete guideline is, does it support proposed block v3? I have my issues with that API, my quibbles with it, but broadly speaking, I think it speaks to a set of two things. First, it's a higher level API. It's something that validator clients are expecting to call, and they should be ideally as insulated from a lot of this as possible. As many of these changes should occur in the beacon node and below for ePBS in general stages, hopefully. that the Beacon API should be able to be at least somewhat conceptual on this point. Secondly, that we have seen the discussion and that has been sort of litigated. What do people want out of these APIs? What kind of choices do people want in terms of picking blocks? And that API, I don't want to just get in too much into that because that will need its own discussions at some point. It makes a lot of assumptions effectively that the choice is either local or builder API specifically. It needs adjustment. But I think at least the discussion around it points to has a lot of specific evidence of what do people want, and what people want. I think idea 2 is not flexible enough to accommodate that.
I see. That makes sense. Thank you. Any other feedback? Cool. So that is all I have on the agenda items. Are there anything else people want to cover?
So I have a general question, I guess, because it's been coming that let's say on this is related to the testing. It appears like this is a question. What is the overall priority of having this be testable? Or I understand there's a chicken and egg thing to some extent of saying, like, I know POTUS is on record saying he doesn't, wants to spend to bound the amount of time he spends on sort of fully ready tests for the EF test suite, unless it's clear this can go in at some point. And at the same time, what that means is I know Ethan discovered in the last, has been discovering, but discovered more in the last few days. And you've seen this, right? I know you and he have interacted on GitHub and all that, Discord, I guess, as well. So, but my question is starting from that, is this a priority, or what is the plan around? Maybe frame it in a more open-ended, positive way. What is the plan around testability as this develops? I mean, or changes, like going from block to slot auctions, or any of the other changes that are being discussed of ePBS as a whole. Is there a roadmap, even a very, very informal roadmap towards DevNets? I know POTUS has talked about wanting something by DevCon. That's great. I would love for that to happen, but so far it doesn't look super likely.
Yeah. So I guess one question to you is, when you mention testing, are you implying the testing for the Python spec, or you imply testing for like a client code, like unit tests, DevNets, end-to-end? Like, what type of testing is this?
Well, I would say both. They have different purposes, obviously.
Right.
One is, but so for the EF consensus spec tests, those are a good kind of, let's say, model checking in a way. They are not obviously realistic tests in the sense of running different clients and network traffic and anything else. But they show some of these assumptions and about when do you do RANDAO or whatever. You saw that. So that's one. And in fact, I think POTUS himself has discovered many things working through the fork choice, and he's talked about them in previous meetings, and he working in the Discord channel, working through some of the fork choice tests, discovering that or discovering why he added the merge stuff to the spec, which is it just discovers these edge cases which otherwise are easy to maybe not see or ignore. That's point one. I think Ethan and I are different people, despite both working on Nimbus. And so I would say he's working on the consensus spec, and he's a little more focused on that at the moment. And that's what he happens to be doing these days. I personally am more, so I acknowledge his concerns and they are real. I think the more likely schedule blocker or schedule hindrance is going to be having the DevNets and local test nets and an infrastructure for that. And I think one really concrete thing is this something ETH HandoOps is at all ready. I think that they've been very helpful and kind of just be able to set up infrastructure that allows for this kind of testing to become practical and easy. They do the hard work to set that up.
Right. So yes, I definitely agree with you. So the reason I asked that is that I think like for the spec testing, I think like just personal opinion, I think POTUS may agree with me that it's just I think like we should put less emphasis, like POTUS, for example. So generally EIP-7732, so the feature is merged into the main develop branch, but there's no testing around it, right? We haven't written any new tests for the Python spec. And then that is also by design, because I guess like, I mean, we don't know how to do it. We can learn how to do it, but that will take time. But we rather do what we're good at. That is writing client code. That is having a DevNet. That is having an end-to-end test. We should spend time on writing this Python spec test. But the question is that like we probably don't want to do it unless we are confident that this EIP will get in post Petra. But then to gain confidence, we have to have a DevNet beforehand. That is kind of where our thinking is, to spend less time on the Python spec testing, but more time on just writing client code, having a DevNet. So I guess between POTUS and I, this is basically our full-time thing right now. We're not doing anything else. So basically having a DevNet is a priority. I mean, say if today it fails, it doesn't get in, we found some breaking bug, and that is great. But then we don't know what this breaking bug is unless we have a DevNet, unless clients start implementing it. So that's just my take. I wonder if anyone have any takes.
I mean, I agree broadly with that. I'll say in terms of overall, I think the DevNet, practically speaking, is more immediately important. Let's say, more short-term important than the spec tests. So yeah, sure.
Yeah,
but
and if I remember correctly, one of the objectives to actually having something really working in practice is also to test if we have good performance when we have less time for aggregations of the slot anatomy changes. So we really want to run those stuff in practice. And it's not something that is tested by just running Python test checks on the specs. You really want clients to run and deal with networking and slowness in general.
Yeah.
And that also speaks to DevNet specifically. I mean, one of the strengths and weaknesses of kurtosis is that, well, it can assert torque and can certainly add, and other technique can add sort of known issues. Largely, they're kind of discovered after the fact. Sort of what are the ways in which this spec or protocol can, I don't know, fail, can weird message ordering or kind of it's a kind of fuzz testing, but you have to kind of know how to fuzz, and so that means that like you're kind of have to learn how to do that first by running. I mean, DevNets in a more, I think, natural way is probably the most productive direction, and then otherwise, kurtosis and similar techniques often they're testing kind of very happy path setups. The network works perfectly. There's no latency. Everyone starts on time. Nobody has to ever sync. I mean, it's so, and DevNets really hit. I think are a good way to hit a lot of these sort of test. What are the first things that people are going to run into in terms of testing it? So yeah.
Yeah, I guess also speak for Prism, like I think like we are, knock on wood, we're fairly confident to have something before DevCon. I think like for choice is by far the hardest part. But other than that, it's also a very interesting part as well, that like it's actually, so like I'm personally pretty excited to see it progress. I think at the minimum, we could just have like a solo validator. We don't even need actually the builder, just solo validator signs its own header, included, broadcast a block, then broadcast a payload after for a local DevNet. I think that's fairly doable, but yeah.
Well, and this is the kind of thing that POTUS has discussed in the past as what are these sort of minimal intermediate steps, which are not the system that will be built out overall, but which show structurally how ePBS, the protocol, can still work broadly with the existing players and assumptions. And so exactly, if you can show, and especially for people who want to see that it can still work, apropos the discussion earlier about slot auctions and local building and things like this, that ePBS does not, by its adoption, exclude currently relevant use cases. So I think it's still a useful exercise, even if it's not sort of yes, as will be seen by the world eventually.
Yeah, for sure.
So it is fair to say that this transition to slot auction will be after the first round of implementation, because if we are, especially you guys in Prism, if you are in rush to implement something for DevCon, maybe switching to slot auction may be slowing down even more. And if we want to really test something that is really not relevant from the way you got the block, maybe it's just testing the overall structure of things, maybe it's less important to change to slot auction quickly. What's your feeling? What are your feelings there?
I think the slot auction is probably just like 2 to 3 days of work. I mean, if I want to change, we should just do it now. But then I guess like the reason that I haven't done, I wasn't at the last meeting, which is there wasn't that many like signals to thumbs up. But things like today, we got more thumbs up. I guess eventually we'll reach over the threshold and someone will do it. But yeah, I will make the meeting notes saying that like Teku, Nimbus, and the Lodestar both support it, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Okay.
Sounds good. Anyone else?
So one final thing, maybe, is that I think it would be useful to have a slightly codified version. I know POTUS has mentioned this a couple of times, and I know offhand what some of the steps he has in mind are, like a scaffolding steps, basically. I mean, I guess practically, I'm looking at this as the person implementing this for Nimbus currently. Right now it doesn't really matter. They're implementing their computational algorithms more or less, but there will come a point at which we start getting to how can we kind of keep having minimum viable kind of constructions. I don't want to say products here, but to test ePBS constructions. And I know POTUS has, again, he's suggested some in the past. I know what they are, and I can relay those and help implement those. But I think having that scaffolding be, I don't know, some suggested, not the only possible, but be written or having some examples, minimal examples of what an ePBS setup might look like that does not depend on having a full, I don't know, ETH Panda ops, multi-client, etc. infrastructure might look like.
So is this just more like a testing setup you're thinking about?
Roughly, or even more development and testing. I mean, this is, I'm thinking back to a little bit, how like the engine API or something. We had this sort of staged development of where long before the interop fully achieved, how basically and with the purpose that the consensus sort of have now, which is kind of everyone comes to the table with like maybe they have bugs, but everyone passes the consensus spec tests, and so it kind of the scope of issues. Here, I guess what I'm suggesting, I mean, it doesn't have to. I don't know if it can be as codified. We don't have a bunch of convenient unit tests for everyone to run, right? That's not It's not that uniform yet, or nor will it ever be. But something where maybe some possible scenarios that are sort of known to be simpler, or known to be achievable in the scope of one client. Maybe starting with the kind of what you're describing, right? The kind of local block building only. So, but because I'll provide a concrete example of the kind of thing I'm thinking about. It is possible to start with, like, one of the major refactorings is going to be the slot timings and when things happen within a slot. That's fine. That's how this works.
Right.
But that needs testing, and that needs sort of ideally that we can start testing that in an isolated way on its own, and that means testing with like locally built blocks using the existing engine API and things like this. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is having a example. I don't know. I guess we use the word milestones in Kenya a little bit in previous similar meeting to kind of scaffolded milestones. And so far, I mean, they clearly exist in different people's minds. I have some in mind. I know POTUS definitely has a bunch of very specific ones. He's been able to just rattle offhand. Like, I know they exist, but like having those written down somewhere.
Right. So I guess before, even for every hard fork, we had this M0, M1, M2, like those milestones. We basically do the same thing here.
Exactly. That's, sorry, I was not very good at expressing this, but
no worries.
I was getting at it. Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Definitely. Yeah. I will add notes to that as well. Cool. Anything else?
From me, no.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Happy Friday. See you guys around the internet.
Bye, guys. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.